I I have to say this as someone who lives in the UK. There's been a few moments where I have genuinely sort of been embarrassed as like to be, oh wow, those are the people who are representing us. Brexit itself. The entire Boris Johnson premiership, the many actions, of course, of Boris Johnson himself. Um, you know, and that's just, well, maybe recently. But there are a number of things that have happened, but that's not what we're going to go into today. Because if I was someone who lived in America and I had seen the speeches given by Pete Hegseth and JD Vance, I would be incredibly embarrassed because as far as the reaction has been, it hasn't been good. Europe has not suddenly rallied around and go, "Oh yes, exactly right, Mister Vance. We'll get on that freedom of speech stuff." Not only that, but you also had a Hegseth meltdown and not even answer a question about when a reporter asked him, um, "You're talking about all these concessions that Ukraine is going to have to make. What about the concessions Russia is going to have to make?" And he just goes, uh, yeah, this is entirely, I think, entirely embarrassing. It's incredibly worrying on this, especially when it comes to sort of the matter of European security. And it is really the most fundamental, I think, unfolding crisis we have right now. All of Europe should be very worried about this, and all of Europe needs to be coming together to really find a collective solution on this. Um, and there are already things developing in that way. I've said it repeatedly that if once this happened, European strategic autonomy, European defense, all of that is going to start very, very quickly coming together. Very, very quickly coming together. And it is already. However, I did want to sort of cover um, what the responses to these speeches has been, not from the UK perspective, but from someone somewhere in the UK, or not the UK, from in Europe. And specifically, we're going to go have a look at DW and what their coverage of this Munich Security Conference has been, because I have been sort of watching their coverage on this. It's been very, very good over the past sort of couple of days. What they've been doing and how they've sort of been covering it, not just covering, of course, JD Vance, but every the other discussions that have been going on here as well. So they've been doing some amazing coverage on some of this stuff. So I just want to go into this because this is sort of really synchronizing what was said, the implications of this, and what the reaction has been from other European leaders, because it's kind of really important. Lewis Goodall has his own Substack, and he very much pointed it out very clearly that this is probably one of the most important things for European security, probably since 1945, 1991. Not since those two moments has the mind been sharpened on what European security and defense really should mean going forward. So, but maybe we'll cover that at another time. But I want to cover sort of this today. So before we do get into this, like I say, thank you very much for everyone who does help us support the channel. Like I say, you can click the like, click the share button. Down below, there's the Patreon page. There's a one-off donation called Buy Me Coffee. We can well buy me coffee, a YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So off we go over to DW. For this, the fundamental rift between the US and EU opens up in Munich. So silence fell and the tension in the room was almost palpable as US Vice President JD Vance walked to the podium at the Munich Security Conference, with just 48 hours earlier, the world had felt like a different place. Europe knew, of course, how things difficult might get with Donald Trump, and his second US presidency would, of course, seriously test the transatlantic relationship. Nevertheless, phone calls between Trump and the Russian leader Vladimir Putin on Wednesday sent shockwaves through the EU and NATO. Suddenly, there was now a growing fear that they may find themselves now completely sidelined in talks about Ukraine and perhaps even restructuring now of the international world order. Just really underlines you the seriousness of stuff that has happened this week. so serious the way that these things have happened and the way that this has unfolded. Really seriously, like and I agree. Yeah, we knew the second presidency was going to be bad. We just didn't realize how bad it was going to be. And I mean, we've still got 4 more years of this practically. So who knows? Who knows? Hopefully, the Democrats will swing it back in the midterms and he'll become a lame duck for the rest of the two. That's all we can hope. It's all we can hope for. In his opening speech, the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, I think that's how you say it, seemed to almost plead with the US vice president, addressing him directly about the reduction now of the US troop presence in Europe, saying, regardless of what your decision may be, discuss it with us. Yeah, tell us what you're going to do. Let us know. Don't just randomly do it. Anyway, shortly afterwards, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, expressed now both understanding and self-assurance that Europe must and will now significantly now spend more on defense and expand its military capabilities, she said. However, von der Leyen remarked that Europe had already done a great deal and that a strong Europe was also good for the US. She said a failed Ukraine would weaken Europe. It would also now weaken the United States. It would also intensify the challenges now in the Indo-Pacific threat and now for our shared interests, she said. The authorities of the world are now carefully watching over what is going on here. If there is any impunity that if you invade your neighbor and violate international borders, whether there are actually any real deterrents, they are watching us. What actions we take to choose. This is why it is important we get this right. And it is absolutely important on this. Because there's a lot of other people watching this going, we could just go and invade our neighbor. What's the consequences? Like, what's the consequences if you go and invade your neighbor? You become an international pariah? No, doesn't matter. You can build your economy to survive a few sanctions. After all, you're taking all that new territory. It's destroying an international world order we have come to see and acknowledge since the end of the Second World War. And the fact that Trump is ripping up the playbook, ripping up the rule book for all of this should be sending shockwaves everywhere. Like, I cannot stress the importance and the seriousness of this, because this is just unbelievable. Unbelievable, the fact that this is what is going on here. And I need to sort of really stress that, how bad this is on this. It shows there are no deterrents. And, there are no deterrents now if someone else decides to do this as well. It's, yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. So there will be consequences from this. What those consequences are going to be, we don't know. I suspect we might find out sooner or later, and I can tell you now, all of us Europeans, we ain't gonna like it. So, and then of course there was Vance's speech. The US Vice President, spoke for 18 minutes, but what he said had very little to do with Europe's external security or even Ukraine. Instead, he used his appearance to deliver a sort of lecture on what the Trump administration understands democracy to be. Yeah, this speech was not directed at a foreign audience. This was directed and done by JD Vance for his own internal audience. So, oh, look, he stood up to Europe. He went out and was strong, because there's a strong suspicion that if Trump doesn't stand again, this is the guy who will be standing again for the Republicans. So after all, for the next couple of years, he's going to want to make sure he leaves an impression on Trump's audience so that he can rally them in the next election. And this is the guy who might take over. So you're not just looking at 4 years of turbulence on this. You could be looking at another decade, potentially, of this under JD Vance. And that is worrying. That should be very worrying. And that should send, once again, the idea America is no longer a reliable ally, because you could sign treaties, you could sign all this sort of stuff, but it only takes someone like JD Vance, Donald Trump, to come along and just go. So anyway, this is what he had to say. So the threat that I worry about vis-a-vis Europe vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it is not China, it is not any other external actor, said Vance. What I worry about is a threat from within, the retreat from Europe from some of its most fundamental values that it's shared with the United States of America. As evidence this, he cited the annulment of what he saw as a wholly legitimate presidential election in Romania. It was declared invalid by the Romanian Constitutional Court back in December after it was established that there had been massive Russian interference. And that was good. That was Romania defending its democracy. Bear in mind, they're going to vote again. That candidate is still on the ballot. They are just going to redo this because they found that this was unconstitutional. So Vance turning around shows he knows nothing about the situation going on in Romania, not that he even gives a damn about Russian interference, which again is even more worrying considering this guy is the vice president. And if Trump croaks, he will take over. It is very likely he will run in the next 4 years to be the US president. So a lot of eyes are on him, looking at what he said on this. Anyway, he continued. He denounced, of course, the ban in the UK on anti-abortion protesters demonstrating directly outside clinics. Again, that exists in America as well. So why is he denouncing the UK when they have a very similar law in their books? But there you go. He condemned, of course, the exclusion of extremist parties now from the political process. Gee, why would you want to exclude extremist parties from the political protest? Gee, I can't think and help but wonder why you might want to do that. Anyway, free speech, I fear, is in retreat, Vance said. What has seemed to be less clear to me, and certainly I think to many citizens of Europe, is what exactly is that you're defending yourselves for? What is the position of that animates this shared security compact? What we all believe so important? Vance asked the majority of European allies now stared at him in dismay. Yeah, if you watch that speech, like you can clearly hear the clapping is like just so few people are just clapping or just not even clapping at all. It's just like, yeah, that speech did not go down well in that room. However, this is where we get to the criticism of this. So, the German defense minister came right out saying, we are also now fighting for your right to be against us. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said in response to the US Vice President's speech. He said that it was one of the mottos of the Bundeswehr and also receptive now of democracy. He said democracy was called into question by the US Vice President earlier, not just in Germany, but in Europe as a whole. If I understand him correctly, he compares now conditions of parts in Europe to those under authoritarian regimes, he said. This is not acceptable. This is not the Europe and not the democracy in which I live in and where I am currently campaigning. So I really got to give it to Pretorius. He came out swinging. Obviously, he was there. He got to give a direct, blistering response. And this seems to be most of the reaction to Vance's speech. Like, our democracy is not failing. It's not under any kind of internal threat. You are just annoyed about some of the things that we are doing to protect our democracy in Europe. So it's unbelievable, but that is where we are. That is generally where we are, that this speech happened. I cannot believe it. I genuinely cannot believe it that he came out and did this type of speech. It's unbelievable, to be honest. Kathleen Kluwer-Astabrook, a political scientist at the Bertelsmann Foundation, said to DW that Vance's speech now breached all established norms, but not in the right way that might have been expected. Normally, she said, you would never speak to allies about domestic political matters in such a setting. But Vance's speech made it clear what strategies we can now expect in in distorting now the factual, fundamental, and norm-based understanding of what we regard as democracy. Again, insane that we had this speech, but there you go. Anyway, they also said this is the third of a speech which was now littered with conspiracy theories, misinformation, and the demand that these misrepresentations now be taken seriously. And this is it. This is the craziness now that America is in. That they are demanding that we take conspiracy theories, misinformation, and misrepresentation, and we take somehow we are meant to like treat these things seriously, and they're not. They're jokes. They don't understand the consequences of why we don't take them seriously, or why we don't allow these types of conversations to be in, in the political norm. But this is now America. This is now what it is going to start saying for the next couple of years. I mean, what if Donald Trump decides, well, tell you what, I'm going to put a free speech tariff on you. If you, quote, keep these, I don't know, certain types of laws, I'll put this free speech tariff on you. I don't know, he could. Yeah, he's just showing he'll just tariff whatever he wants, so why not? It's worrying beyond belief. Anyway, the longer, of course, the US Vice President's speech went on, it became very clear that the transatlantic disagreement is no longer, quote, just about the world's crisis zones, Ukraine and the Middle East, or now for the fair sharing of that burden. The rift between the US and its European partners is now much more fundamental. For decades now, the much valued common community of values was now the ideological glue that held the Western world together. NATO and its EU allies could always now confidently rely on the defense of democracy, free speech, and the rule of law. Everything, as we said, that is the post-World War II international order that we have always fought for. Everyone in the West has always agreed that is what we are there to do. However, not so for America anymore. Now, though, of course, these terms are being hijacked, reinterpreted, and redefined by elements of the political elite, and not just only in the US. This rift has now opened up in the transatlantic alliance. How should the Europeans actually deal with this situation? The potential now for influence has to be completely rethought, said Alsbrook, as now the first step. They must now try and see things from the US altered perspective and work out what they can actually offer at Washington to now re-emphasize their common ground. How do you even go about that? Oh yeah, we've now got to now alter our perceptions for now America, the Trump's and Vance's warped view of reality. It just how do you even go about approaching that? Anyway, Ashbrook also pointed out that it was now much easier in Trump's first term, and of course there were still points at least of contact, saying the president is now much more shielded. Vance's speech could have been entirely written by Elon Musk, she said, stressing that was why it was even more important that Europe should now present a united front and speak with one voice. And that's what I've been saying since the very beginning. That is now what has to happen, even more on this. However, this was the one I think that's kind of shocked people. China has now come out and said, we'll help support you on this. And I'm like, well, if the US ain't going to support this, China has a lot of sway over Russia. Maybe we should be saying, hey, China, tell Russia to knock this off, that this unacceptable land grab is just completely unacceptable. Maybe we do need to be partnering with China more on this. And, don't get me wrong. I know China has problems. I know China has massive problems. But if they're going to offer their support, maybe we should, take that seriously. So, support, of course, for Trump's European allies then came from a very unexpected quarter. Immediately after Vance's now controversial speech, the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi, I think that's how you say it, took to the stage, and the tone of his speech was far more conciliatory towards the European continent. He said, "The regards, of course, European China now work as partners, not rivals. Beijing," he said, "has always seen in Europe an important pole in the multipolar world." He stressed that there now needs to preserve the UN-led international system and states that Europe now had a key role in playing in the peace process in Ukraine. So that also says that even China is kind of shocked, maybe, about this peace process that could be about to happen between Russia and America, basically to carve up Ukraine. I think that they are worried about that because one of the things they want, of course, is they want to take Taiwan and they want to take it legitimately and be seen as like legitimately taking it as part of their country. If these two countries go away and carve up this country, what does that say about their future plans and their future ambitions for trying to, reacquire Taiwan? So they are now asking themselves, well, hold on, where do we stand in all this? Where do we stand in all this? So I think this is kind of insane that even China is now like, our European friends and brothers, let us now step in to preserve the UN-led international system. Just like, what? Anyway, by the close of the first day of the Munich Security Conference, it was very clear that the global now power structure is facing massive upheavals and that the outcome now is even more uncertain than ever. And oh boy, is that true. Oh boy, is that true. There are going to be consequences for the fallout of this. We still don't know, of course, what's going to happen when Trump and Putin meet. Who knows what's going to happen there? But yeah, there will be consequences from this. Remember what I've always said, that the whole reason the Korean War started was because at that time the then Defense Secretary did not mention South Korea as a US security commitment. And that was taken as a green light to launch the invasion. And that is how the Korean War started. Be under no illusions, as Zelensky has said, Putin has an army. He ain't going to demobilize it. He's going to put it to use. And one of the worst things I fear is he could actually put to the test, first and foremost, Article 5. Because there's a city in Estonia called Navar. It is right on the border, literally right on the border. It is this line, and then there's the bump around the city. What's to stop Putin going, oh, well, that city's mine now? This is why I always highlighted the fact that Biden said every inch of NATO territory will be protected. What if that happens and Donald Trump just turns around and says, well, it's just a city? Big questions are going to be asked of this and this security conference, and there will be consequences. There will be consequences because of this around the world, especially for Europe, even more so. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.